Hey, I'm actually going to read an essay that I wrote about my experience in my professional life so far. So thanks for listening. I was a 22-year-old summer intern when I was asked to work on the case of a man named Timmy. He was scheduled to be executed at the end of that summer, so I went to meet Timmy. And here I was in a visitation booth at Central Prison, barely having started my own life, looking across at a man who was about to lose his. Mostly we just talked about his life, and I went to see Timmy's family, and he had a young son. I remember sitting in that family's home, and the boy brought out his calendar, like the kind you hang on the wall, and in the square of the date on the calendar that was the execution date, he had written, "Dad dies." Timmy didn't die at the end of that summer. His lawyers won him a stay, but a few years later, another execution date was set, and I went to see him. But I didn't know how to deal with the uncertainty, the messiness of the situation. He was probably about to die, but maybe he'd get another stay. He told me he loved me. Not in a romantic way, I don't think. I think he was just grateful for someone who'd been kind to him. It was all too intense for me, so I just tried to act hopeful and upbeat, like this wasn't our last meeting. It's obvious to me now that that was just my unwillingness to face the grim reality of the situation. I don't think I said the right things, but I don't know if you can ever really be prepared for a conversation like that. A few days later, the governor denied clemency. A gallery of spectators assembled to watch. Employees of the state of North Carolina injected Timmy with chemicals to stop his heart and his breathing, and he died. Timmy killed his father-in-law. He wasn't innocent. There are innocent people on death row. But what's more interesting to me right now is to talk about the cases like Timmy's that are much more typical, and I suppose more complicated. People who have done terrible things, and how do we respond? The more I know about the death penalty, the more problems I see with it. And what seems most pressing to me now is that the death penalty increases pain. It's like a machine. It takes this terribly painful human event, murder, and it takes that pain and it replicates it, and it just sends it spewing out in all directions. Even before the murder, there is pain. Murders are born of pain. I've gotten to know a lot of people who've committed murder. And in a lot of ways, they're a lot like the people you and I meet out here every day. But almost uniformly, every single person on death row experienced childhood trauma. And it's one thing to hear the word trauma, or child abuse, or even sex abuse. And it's another thing to know the things that I now know about what happens to some children in their own homes while they're growing up. Many years after Timmy died, I found myself facing another execution. My client, Cooley, was executed last year in Virginia. And when I was first appointed to Cooley's case, and I read about what he had done, I felt physically nauseous. I could only read the case file for a few minutes at a time because it was so upsetting. I was sick and I was furious with him. But when I met Cooley, he was gentle and he was thoughtful, and I started learning about what Cooley suffered as a child, and my anger waned. I learned that he was raped by an older brother on a regular basis from the time he was 4 to the age of 11. His father would yank him from his bed in the middle of the night and drag him to the basement to administer severe beatings. Cooley began using drugs and alcohol when he was still in elementary school. And what other tools did he have to numb himself? High on PCP, he inflicted pain of the magnitude that was inflicted on him. And Cooley's trauma is typical of what I hear in my cases. On the day Cooley was executed, I was in the middle of trying my first capital trial case in Raleigh. My client's name was Nate. And like Timmy, Nate had killed his father-in-law, but in addition, he'd killed his mother-in-law too. And he also shot his wife. He very nearly killed her as well. And Nate's 3 children were hiding in a closet when he did all of this. They heard everything and they saw most of it. And Nate actually did this. He was not innocent either. And I did not find it easy to work with him. Everyone wants control over their own fate, but Nate found himself in a situation in which he had almost none. My job is to give people advice, but Nate did not want my advice. He did not trust the legal system. He did not particularly trust me or my co-counsel, and I don't blame him, really. Still, it made the situation challenging. But as with Cooley, the more information I have about another person, the more I can access compassion for them, and this was true of my relationship with Nate. He committed a crime of domestic violence, but he also grew up with domestic violence. And like Cooley, he ended up reenacting his own trauma on others. So from the beginning, these cases are about trauma on top of trauma, and then you add the death penalty, and it takes all that pain, and it compounds it, and it sends it out in these waves that radiate into infinity, these concentric circles on circles on circles, like the pain Timmy's son must have felt as he marked his father's execution date on his little calendar. Or Nate's family. They didn't kill anyone, but they were very much victims of the machine that is a capital prosecution. I know, because it's my job to get my clients' family members to reveal their deep, dark family secrets. The stuff that happened to them, that's so horrific, they never want to have to think about it again. They spend their whole lives trying not to think about it. And then I come into their home, or I'm a complete stranger, or I send my investigator in there, and usually we're pretty different from them in terms of class and race. And I need them to tell me these secrets, stuff that's absolutely shocking the first time you hear it. And I don't need the general outlines of what happened. I need details. What did it feel like? What did it sound like? How many times? And maybe these people don't want to tell me these incredibly intimate stories of their trauma, but I don't get to simply respect that boundary. I remind them that if you don't tell me, your brother or your son or your cousin might get the death penalty. And of course, I do my very best to build trust and to be incredibly respectful and empathetic and to just listen with no judgment. But the bottom line is this: my job is to get this information. That's my obligation to my client. That's what the death penalty machine requires. Because the goal is not just for me to gather these stories of horror for myself. No, my job is to make them public. Those questions that I asked in your living room that you didn't really want to answer then, well, I'm going to ask them again. But this time you'll be on the witness stand, in front of a judge, in front of a jury, in front of television cameras, in front of a court reporter who is taking down your every word. You are going to have to tell them about how you were stripped naked and beaten, or how you watched your little brother get raped, or about how your father forced your mother and sisters into prostitution. Or maybe you're the person who did some of these horrible things long ago, and you're going to have to admit it. And you can't say no, because the state is trying to kill someone you love, and this testimony might save them. So you do it, which takes great courage. Still, Cooley's families told their secrets for nothing. He was executed. For Nate's family, at least it worked. The jury chose life instead of death. But at what cost to them? I don't know, because I haven't followed up with Nate's family. That's not part of my job. The system doesn't offer them any services in the aftermath. And to know that I am, to some extent, responsible for their pain, that's hard to carry around. If there are these concentric circles of pain, my own pain is in there somewhere. I'm just a fallible human being, but I have the unbearable responsibility of defending someone's right to live. The death penalty machine doesn't leave much more room for my humanness than it does for my clients. In the middle of Nate's trial, I had to drive up to Virginia to stand with Cooley's family in the January cold, holding vigil while he was executed. And the next day, the judge in Nate's case had given me the morning off, so I had a few hours to try to process the end of one client's life and my failure to save him before I had to go right back to the hard work of trying to save another. There's also the pain of the jurors who have to sit there in these cases, regular citizens who don't want to be there. They're being asked to weigh the value of another human being's life. And there's the pain of the prison officials. They're being asked to care for these inmates up until the moment they're ordered to kill them. And of course, the pain of the victims and their families. I will not presume to speak on their behalf. I'm fortunate to never have been in that position, but I have seen nothing in my years of doing this work to convince me the death penalty is a solution to the enormous pain of losing a loved one to murder. And if we're going to talk about these circles of pain, there's another obvious person that I haven't mentioned, the defendant. Nate, Timmy, Cooley, the person on trial. And maybe that person is innocent. It's pretty easy to imagine the innocent defendant's pain. But what if they aren't innocent? What if they did something absolutely abhorrent? Do we consider their pain? Some say if they're in pain, that's a good thing. That's the goal. Maybe they don't deserve the privilege of our compassion after what they've done. And again, I think the more you let yourself know about another person, the harder it is to take that position. But I suppose that's a decision we all make for ourselves, whether we try to place ourselves in that person's shoes and walk around in them for a while. I guess I've chosen to do that, or at least to try. And maybe you'd make a different choice, because it sounds hard, right? So far, I think I've probably made my job sound really depressing. And who would choose that? But actually, doing this work has shown me that the situations in life in which we see the worst of humanity are the same situations that bring out the best. And what I mean is that oftentimes pain produces more pain, but just as often, sadness and fear give birth to courage and hope. By my count, I've gotten to know about 20 people living their lives on death row, under sentence of death, but they are living their lives. And some have a hard time coping, but there are some who I actually count as role models for me in how to grow and change and deal with the difficult parts of life. I have one client who writes beautiful essays that he shares with the world by having his friend post them online. I have another who helps administer a pen pal program for his fellow inmates. And I have another client who, when I met him, he wanted to die. Slowly, through artwork and by building relationships with other inmates and pen pals and his legal team, he has gained the will to live. He had no contact with his mother when I met him. And then one day, around Christmas time, he heard a sappy song on the radio that made him want to write to his mom. And through that small act of humility, he has rebuilt their relationship into something that they never had before he went to prison. One client remarked to me that God works in mysterious ways. He had to be sentenced to death in order to learn that there were people in the world who would care about him and fight for him. That's an impressive reframe if I've ever heard one. It takes courage to hold on to life when you've been exiled from humanity. But what I see is people who understand they've done damage and desperately want a chance to offer something, however small, back to the world. It's such a human drive to contribute, to repair. I think we need to replace the death penalty machine with a system that takes into account the human needs of all the people involved, the human needs, that makes our society better and more just, rather than feeding into an endless cycle of pain. Thank you.
This is for Elizabeth. Birds flying high, you know how I feel. Sun in the sky, you know how I feel. Breeze drifting by, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day. It's a new life for me, yeah. This is not a poem. This is being nervous and vulnerable at the same time. This is knowing I've never been the best decision maker in that my career chose me. A choice that brings temporary badges to prisons, jails, and mental institutions. This is walking through concrete halls and shoving steel doors. This is the desire to laugh at death. This is for my pennies from heaven that are given the gift of determining their last meal. This is Helen Keller reminding us that life is a daring adventure or nothing. This is guiding the fingers of blind justice away from the throats of the innocent. But this is not a poem. This is enjoying plastic bowls of cinnamon-covered cereal with my children. This is arriving at their day camp, pondering their development and mood swings. This is teaching them the ability to make choices. This is watching them grow like lavender hydrangeas. This is knowing the little precious souls in their classes could possibly be clients of mine one day. This office is my home away from home. This email is partnered with crisp mornings and ginseng tea. This paperwork holds hands with afternoon hands of gin rummy and chocolate. But this is not a poem. Fish in the sea, you know how I feel. Rivers running free, you know how I feel. Blossoms on the trees, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day. It's a new life for me, yeah. This is not a poem. This is a What is Freedom Anyway song for Henry McCullum, freed in September 2014 after serving 30 years on death row, then proven innocent. This is a Does Freedom Taste Like Lithium song from Floyd Brown, freed in 2007 after being locked away for 14 years, not competent to stand trial. This is a freedom song for Sean Meyer. Sean Meyer, who faced the death penalty but lucked into a jury who searched their souls to pronounce that murder and madness won't occupy the same unyielding mental space. This is for carrying all their crosses with them. This is for the trust that is built across metal tables too wide for hands to brush. This is for eyes that spoke with nothing else could. This is for paperwork the families must endure, for pouring out prayers when you're the one to pour salt on the wounds. This is for seeing the human in them. This is for Nina Simone teaching us that life has dark and bright moments and to be bold enough to triumph over hardships and that the sun must always rise. But this is not a poem. Dragonflies out in the sun, you know what I mean. Butterflies all having fun, you know what I mean. Sleep in peace when day is done, that's what I mean. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me, yeah. This is not a poem. This is an outcry, a communal decision to encourage cultural understandings of violence and our responses to it. This is for the refusal to look at the larger picture of capital punishment. This is stopping the belief that punishment solves all our problems. This is for the pain that continues to spill and spread. This is when hurt people hurt people. This is for the young man whose father was killed by an injection of chemicals that stopped his heartbeat. This is for the mother whose son was electrocuted and discarded. This is for the wife that sleeps alone in her husband's t-shirts. This is for the daughter who dances with strangers at the daddy-daughter dances. This will hold their hands. But this is not a poem. Stars, when you shine, you know how I feel. Scent of the pine, you know how I feel. Freedom is mine, and I know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day. It's a new life for me.